So on to our next segment, and I know we have talked about how the United Nations Secretary General called on the fossil fuel industry, calling them and accusing them of being guilty of arson of our only home, of course, our planet. Well, I had the pleasure to present to you a different kind of arsonist, one that is bringing positive impact to our community. And I have the pleasure to introduce you to the CLEO Institute founder and current senior climate advisor. And going to talk to how she's lighting fires to mobilize the masses and of course our youth. Additionally, she'll be joined by Dr. Scott Evans, Associate Professor of the Department of Educational and Psychological Studies in the School of Education and Human Development at the University of Miami. So Caroline, are you ready to light some additional fires today?
I am ready.
All right.
I turn on my video. There I am. There we go. Well, welcome everyone. As you can tell, we're just going straight into this next one. If you need a bio break or to get a sandwich, you just do it at your own speed. But it is a pleasure to be here today. I cannot thank Yoka, Olivia, and Ian, and Carolyn, the CLEO staff, enough for putting together this amazing symposium. The speakers have been marvelous. I want to thank Tristan for being so gracious and patient with me. As up till late last night, I was still fixing my presentation, so he has no idea what I'm saying. Well, he knows, but you know, give him a break. I'm gonna like to share screen now, so I'm going to go to my desktop. There I am. Every so often, I feel. Am I sharing? Can you all see my screen?
Looks great, Caroline.
Jolly good. So, welcome everyone. I am Caroline Lewis. I founded the CLEO Institute in 2010. And it was a very big, lonely tent back then down here in Southeast Florida. The 4-county compact was just starting. The climate scientists were having hissy fits and nobody was listening. So I just wanted to share a little bit that I was supposed to be a doctor, but I defied my parents and I became a teacher. And I have been happy about that move. I have been a classroom teacher for 22 years and a high school principal for about 6. But I've also been working in informal education, creating programs to engage disengaged audiences. And we really mean that literally from K to grade, not just K-12 students, not just college students, undergrads and postgrads, but everybody, all walks of society. And informing the CLEO Institute, and I look at my little work-life journey and the trip I'm on right now, you might hear a little accent. I was born and raised in Port of Spain, Trinidad. It's a little Caribbean island just off the coast of Venezuela. It's the last one on the chain. And if you told me when I was growing up there, barefoot and running in the streets and eating fruit off the trees, that I would be doing this today, I would never have believed it. So journeys are important for me in terms of reflecting. But informing the CLEO Institute with some incredible people at my side, I thought it would just take me 6 months to communicate the climate science so eloquently that the whole world would wake up and take action. Well, so much for being naive or arrogant, I don't know which it is, but here I am 12 years later, and we really moved the needle, but not enough. So we're here today to let you know that you're part of all the motivating and mobilizing that we want to inspire individually and collectively. And that's the role of the CLEO Institute. And that's my role personally as well. So when people talk to me about education, I try to give my lens as to what I think education is and how it ought to unravel and who should be engaged. And I want you to know that I consider every human being a teacher and a learner. And we switch those roles all the time. You may not consider yourself a teacher, but you are. In your circles of influence, your conversation matters. If you have an audience that you could reach outside of that circle of audience, do it. But I was motivated in 2002 when I read an article that had Jane Goodall leading the article with the quote of why we have to act on the environmental crisis. And her quote was, "The greatest danger to our future is apathy." And that resonated with me because I can't tolerate apathy. And who best to help me figure out how to combat apathy than William Butler Yeats, whose quote I use all the time, and he said literally that education is not the filling of a pail, it is the lighting of a fire. And that's why Yoka is mentioning the arsonist in me. I believe in the arsonist in all of us. We are educating to inspire and engage. We are lighting fires. So many people have lit fires in me, and I am the product of that. So I just want to make sure you all understand that we are all in the business of inspiring and being arsonists in each other's lives. The thing that people don't seem to understand is that we have to create the opportunities to engage others. When I first left the schools and started working in botanic gardens and outside in informal education, I wanted to create a high school program, and they told me, well, you know, teenagers just don't care. And my response was, well, what have you done to create an opportunity to engage them so they care? So the whole idea that we just expect people to want to learn doesn't always happen. So we have to create the opportunity, the engagement, the conversation, the competition, the class, the course, whatever, the opportunity to get people to wake up to the issue we think they need to. And my go-to design for education is from Wiggins and McTeague, who talk about backward design, understanding by design. Start with your end in mind. And my end is to build the political and economic will in all of mankind. So let's move to the right-hand column. Who is involved in education engagement? All of us are. You, me, us. We're all learners and we're all teachers. We have to be interdisciplinary because we all learn differently. We have to be intergenerational because we need to be inclusive. We have to collide all the data, all the science, with all the justice issues that are brought to the surface as climate is a threat multiplier. And we have to do all of that for the sole purpose, or for the main purpose, of building political and economic will. Individual change matters. Change your light bulb, drive electric if you can, but the most important engine of change is political and economic will. So more than anything else, we want to make sure everyone here understands the importance of preserving voting rights, of making sure you vote as if your life depends on it, because it's not a joke, it does. When people tell us, well, I can't worry about climate because I'm worried about immigration, or I'm worried about healthcare, we connect the dots for them. They have to know that those voter concerns are completely amplified by the climate crisis. So I want you to think of yourself, all of you listening today, as on a journey. If you had to rate yourself on your knowledge, what you have learned, on a scale of 1 to 10, with respect to climate science, do you understand greenhouse gases? Do you understand the sources of these greenhouse gases? Do you understand the impacts they're having and what the solutions are? Give yourself a score from 1 to 10, 1 being, I know nothing about it. I know people like Caroline are freaked out, but I don't know why. And 10 is, I know everything because I'm a published climate scientist. What would you give yourself on that knowledge scale, that learner scale? And think about it, because if we speak to you a year from now, we hope that number has moved up. If you're currently on 7, we want you to go for an 8 or 9. If you're on 2, we want you to move up to a 6 quickly. And then the second scale is your education and engagement scale. On a scale of 1 to 10, I talk to everybody about the climate crisis, is a 10. I don't shut up about it. 1 is, I don't talk to anybody, I'm an island, leave me alone. So with respect to educating and engaging others, your own climate voice, where are you on a scale of 1 to 10? And as you answer that, think about it as a journey and make a pledge to move up on those scales of knowledge and make sure you understand that the people you're speaking to are not homogeneous. Back in 2010, when I was forming the CLEO Institute, Anthony Leisowitz from the Yale University, together with George Mason, started analyzing Americans' attitudes towards climate change and came up with these 6 American scales, telling us that we range from being very alarmed and concerned to being very doubtful and dismissive. And they polled and put the percentages up for them. Now I want you to focus on the 2 left-hand circles, alarmed and concerned. Just about 40% back in 2010. Look at the doubtful and dismissive, about 24%. Now, how has that changed over time? Well, you look at 2015, 2020, and 2021. And if you look at the alarmed and concerned in 2021, we're way past 50%. And if you look at doubtful and dismissive, we're still hovering in the 20% range, almost. So the idea is that maybe 20% are doubtful and dismissive and do not want to engage, but that means 80% are ripe for a conversation, are ripe for you to educate them, for you to help them think about this differently. Keep in mind too, some people just want facts. They want symbols, they want graphs, they want data. And others are more emotion driven. They want narratives and images, and they want to be intuitive about why the problem is so big. And I learned from so many, but the group over there at Oregon State University really put together the need for new synergies in an interdisciplinary way. And so these Venn diagrams really speak to me because the sweet spot is dead center, where we're using all the disciplines to provide lenses for people to view the climate crisis as something they need to understand and work on fixing. We always ask ourselves, well, what can we do? What can we do? Well, you can do any of these things. Depends on what your world is. If you teach, then you have a class or a course you can definitely influence. Or if you don't, you can create an art contest. You can do storytelling in the library. You can do film screenings and have panel discussions. You can grow food gardens and talk about food waste and food insecurity. So there's no strategy lacking because there's no magic bullet. There's so many of them. Our role is to come up with these opportunities to engage very broad audiences. Together, we will amplify the collective ripple effect. And you'll never know who you've influenced. Just trust me, you're influencing many when you take on this fight. And Susan Clayton, who talked about the social context for climate, gives us some grounding in why our voice matters. The educational process really talks about you as a messenger, you as the educator. You influence how people receive the message. And that's particularly true in your circles of influence. So use your voice. Make sure that you heed the words, that the messengers matter, that you matter, that the source of the message influence the reception. So when we have politicians who understand the climate crisis and speak up, they're influencing many more people than we are. Our goal is to motivate the masses. How do we do that? Well, I believe the momentum for a movement to change the political and economic will means we need to combine the urgency of the science with the reality of the justice issues. And when we collide those two worlds, we understand we can have collective impact. Collective impact requires 5 basic conditions. They're listed here in a linear form. I want you to view them more as a web. We can start anywhere. You can start with shared measurement and then find out that those measurements that you're sharing, you have common agendas, you have continuous communication, you can mutually enforce. So impact is big depending on your readiness level for it. Some people can march on the streets and they want to know that they are the agents of change. We did this right here in our backyard in Miami Beach with the youth movement. We did a march for science. We told people that all the changes you make at home are good, but you must vote, and you must vote in every election. And we tell them to take a picture of this slide so they can contact their elected officials, because we need to know our power. Then we say to them, well, what if I gave you $10 billion? Which of these crises, which of these climate impacts would you want to fund? just to show them that your readiness level depends on how much you're thinking about these issues. Remember once we had a mayor in Miami-Dade County who said, if I got $10 billion now, I wouldn't know what to do with it. And we just about lost our minds because we had a plan of what we could do with 10 billion. And then I want to leave you with this thought. This is going to take about 3 or 4 minutes, but it's how you can approach this difficult topic. You know, I want to sit everybody down and tell them we screwed up. We did a very bad thing. A lot of people made money, but the planet was destroyed in the process. That's the reality. But we have to meet people where they are. Some of them want the images, so give them the images. Let them see what the news is telling us. Let them show us, let us show them globally what is happening. Try to make them laugh. I did a whole presentation just with this slide once, because it makes people laugh, and it also talks about extreme heat and what we're getting ready for. Yes, it's true. If you're paying attention, you tend to be a little bit more depressed than those who aren't paying attention, but it's a reality check for us. For Algo. Nobody wants that inconvenient truth, you know? And then this one made me laugh because I don't have a complete plant-based diet, but I aspire to it. And chocolate is salad, where I sit. You can do science. Just pelt the data at them. Just show them everything. The parts per million going up. Talk about how climate has changed in the past. Talk about how it's not the sun that's causing it right now. We know that from measurements. Show them this. 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius in the Arctic Circle in 2020. And don't dumb it down too much for them. If you have time, let people learn the vocabulary. Everybody, no matter where they are, can learn some basic science terminology. Make sure they understand the justice issues, that climate is a threat multiplier. If you're not familiar with the Alice reports, please become familiar. Alice is an acronym for the working poor. People are Alice if they're asset limited, income constrained, but employed, literally living paycheck to paycheck. And here in Southeast Florida, where we're from, more than 55% of our population is poor or working poor. Get out in those communities. You can ask me about this later in our discussion sessions, but we went out in 4 cities in Miami to talk to them about what they want to know about climate change, to bring together people in a town hall and have them run it, with CLEO coaching them on the side, learning from them the things that they're really worried about, and they want more education and engagement and a seat at the table. And you know what was really surprising? How much they enjoyed those presentations, and they want to know more. They want to know why we are doing this once a month. Mental anxiety hits all of us, but those with the most vulnerable situations, economically and otherwise, experiences mental health greatest. Provoke discussion. Is this our new normal? Is this what we have to look forward to if we're a coastal city? Look at the global situation. You're worried about immigration now. The food insecurity mapping that has been going on globally shows that while North America will suffer, the biggest areas, Africa, Asia, and Europe, are really going to feel it. And where do you think they're going to want to come? So this could trigger a discussion. Talk about this. That movie, Don't Look Up, is exactly this, where we have the data screaming at us and we're pretending we have time. Provoke them. Ask them if they want to run for office. Heaven knows we need more people who are thoughtful running for office. Talk about tipping points and why we have such limited time. And of course, talk about solutions. Because where there is crisis, there is opportunity. And do not take mitigation off the table, ever, ever, ever. We're living in a state with a governor that wants to fund adaptation, and we are grateful. But we cannot just adapt to this. We have to go to the source of the problem. Project Drawdown, research-based ways to really draw down the greenhouse gases, follow it. As Yoka said, we have the answers. We just need to act on it. And lastly, see if you can inspire people. This faith-based group just sort of gives me so much joy. This Native American proverb reminds me that we do not inherit the youth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. And I'm a crazy woman, yes, I know, but we are the ones that are going to change the world. And I want all of you to see yourself as that agent of change. You're a teacher, you're a lifelong learner, and you're crazy because you want change. You want it now. And my favorite from His Holiness the Dalai Lama is, today we understand the future of humanity very much depends on our planet, and that the future of the planet very much depends on humanity. So I leave you with the fact that you are part of a ripple effect. You are one of the magic bullets we need. Understand your role, please embrace it, and know that there are tremendous resources at CLEO and outside of CLEO we would love to share with you. So thanks so much for listening. And now I hope to enjoy my conversation with Scott and then with the audience in general. Thank you. Am I back? I have to stop sharing screen. Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, thank you, Caroline.
Yay.
How are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
And thanks to everybody for being with us on a Saturday. Caroline, your talents as an educator were on full display here, so thank you for that. Lots of food for thought and ideas percolating for my own approach to educating people on these issues. Got a few things I want to discuss with you, and then we can open it up to the questions from the audience. But I really wanted to kind of celebrate you emphasizing the importance of political and economic will as an important kind of focus for this work. I'm a community psychologist, and for those of you who have never heard of this academic discipline, which is most of you likely, it's community psychology because it emphasizes levels of analysis and intervention other than the individual in their immediate environment. And it's community psychology because it's also concerned with how people feel, think, experience, learn, act as they work together, resisting oppression and struggling to create a better world. So it's the blending of a focus on community and a focus on individuals that makes community psychology what it is. But I want to talk with you just a bit about the distinction between educating about the science of the climate crisis and education about the causes of the climate crisis, right? Colliding the worlds of climate science and climate justice, as you say in your talk. One of the challenges I've experienced in teaching about any complex social problem, global climate change, homelessness, gun violence, poverty, et cetera, is this issue of framing, right? Or what social movement theorists call diagnostic framing, how the problem is understood and the level of analysis at which we locate kind of causal attribution, the sources of the problem, so to speak. I often encounter groups, students, people in the community who it's easier for them to locate the problems and the source of blame more proximally. Like, for example, they'll blame houseless people for their situation, or blame it on addictions, or blame it on mental health challenges, rather than thinking systemically and structurally and politically. And those framings are often kind of echoed or amplified by dominant discourse in society, right? Media, for example, or sources of disinformation. But in your own educational efforts, have you experienced a similar challenge where it's students or community groups are kind of stuck at kind of proximal sources of blame for the climate crisis? And how does CLEO help folks get to a deeper level of critical analysis, of political analysis?
Well, that's the crux of the matter. Thank you for that. It's exhausting. There are some of them that I will not walk away from. If they have power, if it's a business owner or an entrepreneur or a politician, I am more inclined to take a deep breath and rethink the framing and the ask, because I need them in the fight. If it's my brother or one family member that's just being a stubborn mule, I tell them, well, I am well versed in the science, I understand the urgency, and I am promoting agency. That's my fight. Thank you for listening. And I walk away. But for the other ones, I talk about the reality of a warming planet. And I just talk about a warming planet. And I just, you forget the greenhouse gases, just let them understand it is not disputable that we're warming. And in a warming planet, being ready for the change that is going to result is how I trigger the discussion, especially being from South Florida and Trinidad, because heat's a real issue. So I tend to use heat. You know, down here on the coast, sea level rise is like a gateway drug to get everybody to pay attention to climate change. But people do not see sea level rise as a big threat to them unless they are literally living in view of the ocean, which is silly because saltwater intrusion is coming no matter where you are in this little peninsula. But the idea that we could burn up, that we could stop having sports practices unless it's midnight, and even then, it's going to be too hot for that. How are we going to have to change working conditions for outdoor workers? So the conversation triggered by heat is a much easier in for businesses and for political, and heat and health are a big issue for them. They care about it. And the entrepreneurs, when they think, well, you know, we have air conditioning, I'm not worried. Your employees don't. So we break it down for them to own a very near-term future that's kind of dystopic, quite frankly. And then if that doesn't work, you just give them time. Because I really believe, Scott, that sometimes when you are in these discussions with them and they're not hearing you, or they don't seem to be hearing you, you're dropping a little gem that they hadn't thought about in their minds. And hopefully it'll take root. And invasively, I hope, and really gets them to think more about the reality on the ground.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And it kind of reminded me that part of your kind of educational charge is to it involves working with businesses, right? With you know, some sectors that folks may implicate as helping maintain or keep this issue from moving forward. And that, you know, that kind of brings me back to the movement to kind of build political and economic will, right? You call on Yeats in your talk, and you know, Paulo Freire and other critical educators, you know, espouse this idea that education is never neutral, right? It's either liberating or it's domesticating, right? Kind of echoing Howard Zinn's notion of, you know, you can't be neutral on a moving train. And I imagine you kind of run into a lot of folks who see themselves as neutral in some way, right? And neutral politically on this issue. You know, and this changes everything. Naomi Klein suggests that, you know, neoliberalism, the prevailing kind of global ideology and political economic model, is predicated on privatization and free market capitalism. And, you know, she suggests that it must be overthrown through mass resistance if we're going to make any progress on global climate change. And I imagine that that notion is probably not something many of your constituents would be too open to, but I'm curious about where does a critique of capitalism fit in to your education efforts? You know, it's a complex, you know, like neoliberalism, I can't even say it, it's so complex, but it's a complex concept, and capitalism just seems like, you know, the air we breathe for most people. How do you, or do you, and if you do, how do you kind of approach these complex and politically treacherous territories?
Well, I do believe if you're anti-capitalism, you scare more people off than you would want to. So in my mind, I would like to structure capitalism a la Caroline Lewis and make it be a workable model. The way capitalism is currently playing out in our great country is not capitalism. It's stacked for power and money. And just with Citizens United and giving corporations a kind of political power, we do not have a level playing field. Just look at our utilities in Florida. Those utilities are bought and paid for just about every politician. And so even if the utilities know what's the right thing to do, and what to vote for and how to make policy, they don't do it because they're tied to the money. So I don't avoid capitalism, I don't lead with capitalism, but I tell them that unfettered capitalism is absolutely not tolerable. And if it was a true free market, then we would be paying the polluters for putting more and more carbon in the atmosphere. So a price on carbon would be part of a true capitalistic way of presenting solutions and problems and making sure that the government is, you know, we have this, we keep talking about renewable energy, yet we are still subsidizing oil, coal, and gas. Well, not coal anymore, I don't think, but oil and gas. And we're not subsidizing wind and solar. So we're not even, this is the whole idea of fairness. I remember back in the early days of CLEO when I was invited to be on some panel, and they told me that it was just going to be me and another panelist, and the other panelist was a climate denier. And this was like 2012 maybe. And they asked, is that okay with you? I said, yeah, but you know what? I want 98% of the time. And that person could have the remaining 2%. But what do you mean 98? Well, 98% of the scientists agree that the climate is warming and humans are responsible, and we're not going to give equal time to unequal arguments. And I think that's where we as educators, all of us, and I don't mean that because I was trained as an educator, I mean because teaching is in our body. I put a Picasso quote on the Hoover chat earlier that said, you know, the purpose in life is to find your gift, and the meaning of life is to give it away. Well, I think my gift is speaking truth to power and being able to do that and to encourage more of us to do that. And speaking truth to power means not falling into both sides of the argument nonsense when there are not two sides to an argument like this. And the other thing I would say to you is that there are people who feel that, you know, the climate lobby does not care about workers, and that's not true. Because for every coal mine we were closing down, because I did a lot of work with the Obama administration, and I'm now with the EJ movement with the Biden administration, for every fossil fuel workplace that we're closing down, we're feeding a retraining so that they get as good or better jobs there. So we understand it's not just, well, stop, you can't do that anymore. You can't do that anymore, but you can do this, and we're going to help you do it. So I mean, it's a long way to answer your question, but ultimately it is political. Climate change is a political issue. It's not a partisan issue. So when Republicans come into our space and embrace it, we celebrate. We're like, oh, give him the microphone, give her the microphone. We want everyone in the political field to understand, if you're a public servant, this needs to be addressed. It's affecting the public. So it's political, it's not partisan.
That's great, thank you. And we talked about kind of the difference between education about the science and then education about, you know, kind of causes, right? But I want to kind of switch to another kind of question of education, right? So, you know, like teaching how to organize and how to build collective power for change, right? So all the information, all of the understanding of the root causes doesn't help us if we can't figure out how to build collective power to put some pressure on folks who make policy, right? One of the critiques of collective impact, you had collective impact in one of your slides, is that, you know, these strategies are often kind of designed and implemented by professionals and experts, and there's not a lot of room for frontline communities and those with kind of lived expertise to lead and to be a part of those efforts. Whereas kind of community organizing and coalition building and power building really puts impacted leaders at the front and center of this work. So I guess the question is, what's the role for kind of education about social change, or like how change happens, and the potential limits of professional-driven kind of change efforts that don't really center impacted leaders in the fight?
You're right, and it's one thing to get so caught up in your head about the theory of change that the practice of change is not inclusive. I would say that you have to play in both fields, and CLEO is a 501c3. We're a nonprofit, so the amount of direct lobbying we can do for a particular bill is limited. But the cause of championing climate action is all our work. We're all doing it. And what we find, one of the biggest frustrations for me, Scott, is when we're trying to bring in the cities and the counties to listen to the frontline communities articulate their climate voice, because we work a lot with them to kind of find their voice and what's bothering you, what do you see as change. They want a seat at the table, but they legitimately want it. So for that to happen, we have to convene elected and city and county staff to come and sit and listen. The pushback I get too much from staff and electeds is that those people don't have time for this. They're so poor and they're so worried about food, and I call it BS, because we find that empowering them to find and share their voices makes them walk a little taller and feel more valued and valid. And we find that the cities and the counties who come and who do listen find out two things: that there's some low-hanging fruit that they can attend to right away, and there's some good ideas coming from the public that they haven't even thought about. One example comes to mind with a high-low hyperlocal project we were working with staff through your green links. One of those was about bus stops, and the frontline community members were like going, there's no shade, it's so hot, I don't know what to do. And I'm like going, and we're taking pictures of these things. And so when the city and the county staff were listening, they were like going, we really could put a shelter there or a tree. And so the idea of a pocket park at each bus stop was really, really groundbreaking and might come to fruition. I don't know. So I don't know. I think you have to, I learned from the theories from wherever they come, but I adapt them. CLEO adapts them for the reality on the ground. And we find that everybody who wants to study Miami or Florida or these things, they ask us, what are the buzz issues? And we have a handle on that because we've been on the ground working with these frontline communities for years. So I don't think you can do it without them. It just can't happen. And our job is to constantly push that button. I was on the Miami-Dade County call earlier this week when they were sharing some great progress with sea level rise and some of the things they were doing. And I kept pushing, what about retreat? What about planned retreat? What about reparative loss in low-lying areas? Are we looking for that? We've been playing hurricane roulette down here. I don't know if you're aware, but we're going to get a direct hit, and it's going to be a game changer for Alice, anybody who's poor or working poor in particular, because the vulnerability is not equal in a changing climate. We're all vulnerable, but how I experience vulnerability and how my friends in Liberty City experience vulnerability are very different.
Great, thank you. I'm going to turn to some of the questions popping up in the Q&A and kind of weave those in as we go through the last 15 minutes or so. And the first question kind of relates to the question I just asked, and it's kind of specific to Miami, but what are the first steps in building, and I think I would say that these are being built, but what are the first steps in building climate coalitions in an area like Miami? And maybe you can give example of the existing coalitions that are already there or emerging.
Well, I think the question is probably historical. How have we come to the point now where we've built these many coalitions? And I tell you, it's about being very welcoming and making sure that the tent is big enough and full enough. And anybody who wants a seat at the table is brought in, including the enemy. So when the utilities want a seat at the table, we do, but on our terms. When you have ExxonMobil or JP Morgan Chase or these people who are definite contributors to the problem, if they want to talk, we'll listen. But we're also going to be pushing them in a different direction. And I think if we don't, we're going to be in trouble. That's, you know, the problem we have now in politics and media is that they're only talking to each other. The Fox News crowd and the CNN crowd. You know, we have to have some cross-pollination to get people aware of the biggest issues and that we'll all have some common agenda somewhere. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but for me, it doesn't seem like a difficult thing to speak truth to power, to make the tent wider. And I remember when CLEO and the scientists were the only ones in the tent, first thing I did in like 2011 is I had an open call out. Anybody who wants, any organization, any individual that want to be a part of the climate conversation and amplifying that conversation, we're having a meeting. We held it at Pinecrest Gardens. And I'm gonna tell you, 46 organizations showed up in the middle of the weekday. And that was immediately a pulse for me, that people were interested. And therefore we had work to do in terms of bringing them together. When we started going out into frontline communities, we couldn't do it alone, CLEO. So a listening session is literally a listening session. So you tell Miami Worker Center or some organization in the middle of the city, we want to come and talk to your people, please, about the climate crisis and what they know and what they want to know. Can you bring, and sometimes when we went, Scott, there were 8 of us listening and 6 guests speaking in that listening session. But everybody was told, it's not, you're not to talk, you're to listen. And the coalition we took with us came from the social justice groups, like New Florida Majority, now Florida Rising, Catalyst Miami, Miami Workers Center, FIU, UM. I mean, we had a coalition of people. And so being inclusive and intentionally inclusive helps you build those coalitions. Then we decided we want to use these listening sessions and all of that to create climate speakers in these communities, so to lift them up. And so everybody who was already working in these communities were like gravitating to us to help explode in that ripple effect that we could never really measure. So rather than be the only voice in the community, we train them to be their voice. And we are there as a resource. So we build their capacity, then we step back. And I remember when FIU and the Solution Center was first starting, some of the CLEO board members were like, is that competition for us? I said, I don't know what it is, but I am so grateful for it. I'm like, bring it on, you know? We need everybody doing everything because nobody can do it alone. So being intentionally inclusive is 3/4 of the answer.
Yeah, I'm smiling because you brought up the question of competition, and you know, a lot of my research is focused on community organizations and groups and coalitions and how they come together and work together to fight for social justice, and you know, what are the things that get in the way, and what are the things that promote success in those coalition building efforts. And I wonder if I could build on this question a little bit and just ask you to speak to kind of honestly the challenges of working or trying to work in coalition with other groups, given the, you know, often there's this competition for sources of funding, right? There's one grant from the Miami Foundation going out and everybody wants it, for example, even though Miami Foundation is better about supporting collaborative efforts. You know, what are the kind of honest constraints of really working in coalition across groups, across issue areas, more intersectionally, like you said, and what has worked for you guys in making those collaborative efforts work?
So like in 2014, about 10 of us from CLEO went to New York for the People's Climate March. It was 400,000 people, of my best friends on the streets of New York. And we came home so inspired that there was so much of mankind that had that common purpose with us. And so we wanted a Miami march. And so what happened is we started planning a march and we brought in all of these groups, everybody, Miami-Dade College, every institute within Miami-Dade College, all the universities, all the social justice groups. I mean, we had meetings once a month, and then it became once a week, and then it became a couple times a week when we got close to it, and we were organized. And building that coalition was really at the heart of the Miami Climate Alliance. In fact, after the march, a very successful march, first time in Miami, we had almost 1,000 people, and it wasn't about Cuba, because they don't come and march for climate down here. They march for, other issues. But we were delighted, and we didn't want to stop meeting. So following the march, we had a meeting about what we could do. And we talked about it. The main players were CLEO, Catalyst Miami, and Florida Rising. We emerged as sort of the top 3 leaders, and we decided, let's form a coalition of all these organizations and individuals who want to advance the climate justice lens. And that's how it was born. And it's a beautiful thing when it works. Yes, we do compete for money, but that's the nature of the beast. I don't think the problem is that we're competing for the same money. I think the bigger problem is there's not enough money for groups like ours. I mean, I'm gonna tell the story on tape here that it's not that Harvard University comes into our home state and wants to do a big study on gentrification or something. And they get $1 million from the local big guns to tap my brain and all the people who've been working in the climate crisis lens to write their paper. We were their resources. And it really, it's not that I don't want Harvard to get money. Get money. Everybody deserves money. But how do we really make it so that the local people who are really where the rubber meets the road are the ones being recognized for that work and getting the funding? That's how I would phrase it.
Switching directions just a little bit, there's a question about, how do we help scientists be better educators and communicators to the kind of general public? That is assuming, of course.
Well, I would say
some
they've gotten a lot better. I remember I was part of a grant, I don't know, helping scientists tell the story better. And we were videotaping them. It was down in Costa Rica. We were videotaping them. I would ask the question like, what is your area of research and what is the major things you're finding out? Go. And they would start talking. And after 20 seconds, I would say, stop, I'm glazing over. I said, you've got to break it down into consumable nuggets. And that's the best I could have done to explain to a scientist how to reach people, a consumable nugget. I remember once on a major group that I'm on nationally, I think it's even international, where we're a bunch of climate scientists, climate educators, we meet weekly, and we were challenging them to start tweeting the scientists, to start tweeting some of their research findings and so on. And a couple of the scientists went nuts. They were just not happy with that idea. I am not going to reduce my work to 44 characters or whatever the amount is for a tweet these days. And they can't even read a 3-page paper. And I just let it settle. And I said, if all they're doing is reading tweets and you're not tweeting, you're not reaching them. So if you think the work you're doing is so valuable, you gotta tweet. Make it a tweet that provokes them so much that they want to read the paper. So you gotta help scientists get out of their stubborn bubble. Look, we've had quite a few scientists speak today on the symposium, and they've been amazing communicators. I mean, So I don't think the problem is as bad as it used to be, but I do think they could become more real world and understand that a considerable nugget can open doors to more learning, more self-directed learning in the audiences that they're trying to reach.
That's great. I will tell my colleagues exactly that. Talk for a second about the youth climate movement. How do you feel about the youth climate movement, and where is it inspirational? Where is it falling short?
So back when we first started the CLEO Institute, we started immediately with a CLEO Youth Task Force. Over the years, it was mostly high school kids, some college kids. We met at the universities and at the schools. And over the years, they kind of morphed into a more streetwise group that really wants to speak to elected officials. A lot of that had to do with Yoka coming on as executive director, and we got the funds to sort of scale throughout the state. So Tallahassee is in our sights. But we've rebranded as Gen CLEO, the generation of climate leaders. And Gen CLEO meets once a month. We have Gen CLEO strategists and the leaders, high school and college kids. They're amazing. We have a tour of the college campuses happening now, where we're recruiting more Gen CLEO members from University of South Florida, Florida State University, now we're coming down to Miami. And so the idea of building momentum, I can't tell you, Scott, these young people, they want something bigger than themselves to wrap their arms around. And climate is it. Because the injustice of the climate crisis to their generation, asking themselves things like, should I even want kids? I mean, that's just, people should have to make that choice no matter what. But to have climate drive the reason why you're considering not having kids is heartbreaking. So I am overwhelmed, impressed with the youth movement. It gives me great hope. It gets me out of bed every single day instead of staying in there and rocking myself to sleep as these IPCC reports keep coming out and breaking my heart. Because I do think the youth are going to be intolerant of the hypocrisy of the political and economic lack of will to do the right thing, to do what we know. And so I say more power to them. All my programs with young people has always been about empowering them. When I created that Fairchild Challenge a while ago, the kids were saying to me, this is the best. This is where my opinion matters. And so they really want a voice. So the thing we tell them in Gen CLEO, though, is we tell them, we'll give you the microphone and we'll give you the stage, but you better know your facts. Steep yourself in the information, because your passion alone won't cut it. You've got to know what you're talking about and what you're asking for and why you're doing that. So yeah, thank heavens for the youth movement, not just down here in Southeast Florida, but throughout the state, kids suing the state, suing the federal government, and then globally with Greta Thunberg and others.
On the world, yeah. It's great, thanks. And this is, I guess, kind of related, but in thinking about those who are at risk, most at risk for the impacts of climate change and sea level rise, often lower income, marginalized communities, vulnerable communities. Can you maybe say a little bit about your approach to kind of educating or teaching in those settings? It could be young people, could be families, maybe way too busy to worry, like you said before, about something so perceived as far off as climate change. But what's your experience been in kind of helping to raise awareness so that they will join the movement?
Well, you have to be patient and you have to be very forgiving, because they will sign up to come and then they wouldn't show up. So taking that in stride and not taking it personally. I remember one time we were going to have a town hall in Little Haiti. And I told them, I need a date that works for you. They gave me a date. And then a month later, they said, no, that's Haitian Flag Day. We can't do it. So, being familiar with what's happening in these communities helps. Being able to piggyback onto something that's already happening. So you're not creating another thing for them. Making sure if you're bringing them to something, you're providing food and childcare. And you're being a reality check on what it means for them to come to your event. So that, and if you feed them, they will come. And we always feed them. And we usually, as much as we can, use a local caterer. So they're familiar with the food. It's not something that they're unfamiliar with. And I think that that has significantly helped sort of increase the buy-in from the community with us. And also the fact that we really want to empower them and step back so that they feel like we're investing in them as human beings and in their capacity to be leaders. So that has been helpful as well.
Great. And I guess we'll end on this, and I'll try to turn it into a more hopeful question, and you can share your thoughts. You know, there's a question in there about, you know, kind of exhausting our own spheres of influence and educating folks. So how do we kind of get to bigger audiences? But I wanted to maybe reframe it a little bit and thinking about, like, you know, I think all of us who are fighting this fight, working to educate folks on the seriousness of this issue and other issues, the intersecting issues, it can be exhausting and demoralizing in a lot of ways, and leads to burnout for many people. And I expect that there's many people on the call today have found themselves battling despair and looking for a different line of work at times. So what would you say to folks who feel like we're not making progress and their efforts aren't being, there's no results coming from their efforts? And what would you say to those groups to kind of keep in the fight? And what's your strategy for taking care of yourself?
Well, wine helps. A glass of wine every night, that helps. It's kind of interesting to me that you asked that question, because I think climate grief is real. The New York Times this week had an article about the climate scientists, one of them suggesting we're not publishing anymore, we're done. You're not doing anything with this data we're giving you, what's the point? Kind of like don't look up, right? What's the point? And the thing is, like, as Dr. Holder and so many people in the fight remind me, and I'll remind you, we don't know what we don't know. We don't know when that next solution or turn is going to come. We don't know if, because of today's talk, somebody is going to run for office that's going to make big change. So having hope itself is the antidote to despair, and the action that we take. So when these kids demand a climate emergency declaration, I remember the city of Miami, Francis Suarez, the Gen CLEO kids were outside of the city of Miami picketing with little signs about climate emergency declaration. And Mayor Suarez came up, he drove in that day and he saw them and he came over to them. It was very sweet. And one of the kids said, can you declare a climate emergency? And he goes, no, I will behave like it's an emergency, but I won't declare a climate emergency. And I remember the kid peeling out from the group that was around him, and he said, oh, Caroline, he's not hearing us. And I said, get back in there. This is the first time anybody has ever asked him this. So just keep fighting. And do you know, not even 2 months later, Mayor Suarez was at the podium declaring a climate emergency for the city of Miami. So this gives me hope that I have stories, I have ammunition, I have seen these kids with their petitions, I have seen them speak. Our Gen CLEO kids are in the chambers of commerce, they're in the county commission, in the city commission, and they're speaking truth to power with their sweet voices that I know resonate a lot more than my voice, because I've been talking for too long. So they're fresh voices.
That's great. Thank you for that. And I'm going to end this session and thank you for your time and for your words and for all the work that you're doing with and for CLEO and the community, and pass it back to Yoka to take us to the next step in the process here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Caroline. We can hear the loud applause coming from Zoom. Thank you, Caroline. As always, so inspiring to all of us, and really helping us continue to light fires in our work.